Hugh Hewitt, joined now by United States Senator Mike Lee, regular guest on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Senator, welcome back. Good to have you.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
I just had on Mark Zuckerberg and Senator Langford and Representative Gallagher, and I asked all three of them this question I want to ask you. It's not out of the blue. It's just sort of a theme today. Did you play the game Risk when you were a kid?
A couple times, not very much.
All right, so it's a yes. It's a way of looking at the world. So that's a yes. I'm going to find out the real hardcore Risk players as we go through this. Senator Lee, you did clerk for Justice Alito, correct? And so I want to ask
yes,
you.
I did.
I want to ask you about General Flynn. And just this is not a Senate issue. This is just Hugh Hewitt, D.C. Circuit Clerk, and Mike Lee, Senator on Judiciary Committee, and Alito Clerk. I am outraged by Judge Sullivan. I don't think anyone in America ought not to be outraged. What does Mike Lee think?
It's crazy. You can't have a case proceed without a prosecutor. You can't court appoint another prosecutor. It's not within the court's right to have a person prosecuted. You have to have a government prosecutor willing to do it. And here the prosecution has said, look, we can't prosecute this case because it's not a good case. And we made some mistakes, so we're going to withdraw it. In that circumstance, while it's technically, under the rules of procedure, something that the judge does to review and approve that, I don't really see another door there. In other words, while you have to go through the formality of the judge approving the dismissal, there's no real reason for him not to do it. And I think it's outrageous for him to suggest otherwise.
It is outrageous. I explained this morning on the D.C. Circuit of my youth, and I worked for Law and Order, McKinnon and Robb, but it had Bork and Scalia and Ginsburg and Spots Robinson and Skelly Wright and Judge Wilkie, and I mean just all over the board. Judge Wald, Abermikba. They would all have booted this. They would have granted the writ of mandamus in about 5 seconds. I have never heard of this, and I've been practicing law. I'm not in a firm anymore, but I'm still active in the bar in D.C. and California. Have you ever heard of a motion to dismiss a prosecution not immediately granted?
No. I've heard of moments when a judge will take some time to review it and then later approve it. But I've never heard of a delay this long or a deliberation this serious over something that really is no decision at all. It simply involves an acknowledgement, hey, prosecution's not willing to proceed with this case, and then you dismiss it.
You have written a lot about the framers, and you understand. In fact, you've written about the Anti-Federalists as well as the Federalists. They were greatly concerned about the separation of powers. The idea that a judiciary could initiate a prosecution is Star Chamber-like. It would have been anathema to everyone on both sides of the debate about the Constitution. Am I wrong?
No, not at all. In fact, Luther Martin would have had a heyday with this if he could have seen nothing else in his future but this. He would have used this as yet another argument for why he didn't want the Constitution ratified. Now, Luther Martin was wrong on a whole
Explain
lot of
Luther Martin to our audience, including me. I'm blanking on Luther Martin. Who's Luther Martin?
Luther Martin was the Maryland farmer who was a delegate to the Constitutional Convention, longtime Attorney General of the state of Maryland, who became a defiant anti-federalist and tried to oppose the ratification of the Constitution.
He's up there with Patrick Henry,
really
right?
Upset by this idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why explain to people like the Steelers fans out there why the idea of a judge prosecutor is anathema to America?
Well, because we believe in the separation of powers. The prosecution of a case is an executive branch decision. It has to carry with it the accountability of this political branch of government that is the executive branch. That's why within our federal system, we don't allow anyone to be prosecuted except under authority of someone who serves at the pleasure of the president after being appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. That way, everybody within the system has some sort of accountability to the American people. When you give it to a judge, you're giving it to someone who is not elected and won't ever stand accountable to the voters. That's pretty dangerous, especially because that's judicial power, not prosecutorial power. They're two very different things.
Extremely dangerous. So what is the job of the Judiciary Committee when it comes to Obamagate, Senator Lee?
Well, the job of the Judiciary Committee is going to be to review dig into all the facts that we possibly can. Now, remember, it's speaking of this separation of powers issue. It's not our job to convict anyone, to decide whether anybody goes to prison. That's the job of the executive branch, and the executive branch going before the judiciary. It is our job within the Senate Judiciary Committee, however, to get to the bottom of what happened for a different reason. We've got to make sure that our system isn't set up in such a way as to make things like this likely going forward. And any weaknesses we see in the system need to be changed, and changed rapidly, so that we don't have abuses like this moving forward in perpetuity.
Now, General Barr said President Obama and Vice President Biden are not targets, and I understand that. I think there's actually a constitutional issue involved in targeting either of them for acts. I also think that they probably did the smart thing, which is smelling something awry. They said, keep this away from me. But I would like to see Susan Rice and Jim Comey under oath in front of your committee. Is that a possibility?
Yes, it is a possibility, and I actually find it difficult to imagine how we could do our job without having Jim Comey and Susan Rice in front of our committee.
Now, there's urgency here because we have to vote. And it's gone from being a non-issue to me being one of the principal reasons to reelect Donald Trump is to make sure that this investigation is not buried because it goes to the fundamentals of American justice. Will it arrive in time? And do you agree with me on the urgency question, Senator Lee?
It'll arrive in time precisely because I and Chairman Graham and every other Republican who serves on the Judiciary Committee agree with you completely.
Do you have any idea of a calendar for calling then?
It's going to be weeks, not months, and it's going to be very thorough.
Weeks, not months. That means before you go away in July?
Yes.
That is excellent. And in terms of preparing for this, will you allow questioning by every senator, or will it be as the House did, as the Senate did in the Kavanaugh hearings, allowing one lawyer to press the line of inquiry so that it is effective?
I don't think we've reached a decision on that, but I think in this circumstance, it's going to be very difficult to keep individual members from asking questions. I don't think this would be a circumstance in which individual members would want to relinquish that. So there may be portions of it where we would want to have a single lawyer representing us ask questions, but I'm sure there will be other moments when every individual member will insist on speaking for him or herself.
I hope you come up with a hybrid. I thought it was very effective in the Kavanaugh proceedings. I've often found it effective to have both the elected members and a very experienced counsel who's following a complicated thread, because it's not complicated, but there are details where someone as experienced as Jim Comey in evading an answer would be very difficult. Last question on the record, Senator. Would you agree? He's a very difficult witness.
Yes. He's a difficult witness, and I've got firsthand experience with that. When he's been in front of our committee in the past, primarily as FBI director and as a nominee for that position, I've found him very slippery. Now, keep in mind, this is someone who I had admired from afar for reasons that turned out not to be so solid for years. You know, as a federal prosecutor, I admired him as somebody who had been a career prosecutor and who later served as head of the criminal division at the Department of Justice and later as the deputy attorney general. And I thought he was the real deal. During his time as FBI director, I discovered that my confidence in him was quite misplaced. I found him really slippery even before this stuff came out. He wouldn't answer my questions about just about anything.
I'm not a prophet nor a son of a prophet nor a psychiatrist, but there's something that went off the rails there. Thank you, Senator Lee. I want to go off the record now. Stop tape. I have two questions for you that are unrelated.